Lizzie. Today's video is 10 mistakes that Catholics make when debating Protestants. This can be in discussions you're having in real life or on social media in comment sections. Number one is saying there are 30,000 Christian denominations. The study who did this has been totally debunked. They included different Catholic Eastern rites like Melkite and Byzantine as separate denominations. They did similar things with Protestant denominations. So saying 30,000 is completely wrong. It will make people just think that you're lying or don't know what you're talking about. So instead you can say that there are thousands of denominations. But the reality is, even if there are just 3 Protestant denominations, the point still stands that Sola Scriptura creates massive disunity and that there's not one way to go by the Bible. Just don't say 30,000, say thousands. Number 2 is focusing too much on arguing that since Peter's name is Rock, it means he's the rock, therefore Jesus established the role of the Pope. This obviously is true, but my experience has been that Protestants and Catholics will go back and forth in debating this. I've just accepted the reality that the vast majority of Protestants, you're not going to be able to convince them by doing a word study of Rock and Peter. Instead, we need to be focusing on another Bible verse right after that, which says, I will give you the keys to the kingdom. Jesus is saying this to Peter. And the keys to the kingdom is referring to something in the Old Testament. It's the second in command position to the king who is in charge if the king ever leaves. As the angel Gabriel told Mary, Jesus is fulfilling the Davidic kingdom. In the Davidic kingdom, they had the steward position, and so the Pope is the steward position. Jesus is gone, he's in heaven. He's left the steward position in charge, which is the role of the Pope. So I just find that the keys to the kingdom, there's less arguments, less back and forth. Number 3 is calling people heretics. So many people are like, oh, but they believe heresies, so they are heretics. We should call all Protestants heretics. And I just don't see that as useful at all. Just admit it. You're using demeaning language, making fun of someone. And I think people who say this may be taking the church father writings a bit too far, because in the early church, the way the church fathers referred to people who they disagreed with was very harsh. But I think in the 21st century, this isn't appropriate. I think it should be obvious, but calling people heretics is not a good way to draw people into the church. Instead, we should be really loving and kind and patient and explain things in a gentle way and ask questions and make them feel understood too. Just calling them heretics, it doesn't do any good. So just stop. Instead, you can just say that is a heresy or that's heretical. You don't have to say you're a heretic. Number 4 is to over-defend church history. So the reality is there are a lot of scandals that have happened in the church. Things like the Crusades, the Inquisition, how Catholics treated Native Americans when trying to convert them. And I find a lot of Catholics want to explain how what happened wasn't that bad or people are misinterpreting it. And I think there's definitely a place to explain what actually happened during the Inquisition or the Crusades. But I think that that kind of gets you on a tangent. And instead you can just say, yeah, there have been horrible popes. And what argument are you trying to make with that, right? There have been horrible popes and horrible priests. Probably lots of priests and popes are in hell. I think that's just a better way to address it. And there's definitely a time and place to explain these things more in depth, but ultimately don't let it create a tangent that takes the focus off the real theological issues. Number 5 is using too many Bible verses to disprove Protestants. While Catholic theology is biblical and there is so much evidence for the Catholic Church in the Bible, I find that sometimes when discussing with Protestants, Catholics almost get to this like sola scriptura level by relying so much on Scripture to debate them, when in reality, we should explain why Sola Scriptura is nonsensical and why it's wrong. We should talk about how apostolic tradition and the church magisterium has always been a part of Christianity. So yes, it's so important to talk about the Bible, show Catholic theology in the Bible, but don't do that so much that you're avoiding discussing why Sola Scriptura is wrong. It's so important to disprove Sola Scriptura because Protestants will say, oh, well, I don't interpret the Bible verse that way. That's the wrong way to interpret that Bible verse. And it can go back and forth. So just explain, no, we interpret the Bible based upon the early church tradition, which we call sacred tradition. In the video description, I will link my video on Sola Scriptura. Number 6 is assuming or saying that all Protestants think the same. There is so much diversity in Protestantism. There are Protestants who go by some of the church tradition. There are Protestants who study the church father writings in depth. There are Protestants who disagree with Sola Scriptura. I think a lot of times people think about evangelical Protestantism or certain mainline denominations, and they talk about Protestants in a way that they all think the same thing. And in reality, there are thousands of Protestant denominations. There's individual Protestants who disagree with the church they're going to. There's just so much diversity within Protestantism, and so it's inaccurate to try to make it sound like all Protestants think the same, which is why in my videos I always give caveats at the beginning of them that not all Protestants are the same. Even on my Instagram and TikTok, I have caveats that I'm specifically talking about my experience in Protestantism or specific denominations. So definitely give caveats, and if you are talking about a certain Protestant belief, you can say which denominations you're talking about. We really have to remember that the Anglican and Episcopal Church are so similar to Catholicism and just have a few huge differences that they disagree on. So understand that everyone's a little different. Number 7 is focusing so much on the church fathers, almost implying that they're infallible. Catholicism has a huge emphasis on the early Christians who we call the church fathers. The reason I converted into Catholicism is because I saw Catholic theology in the church father writings, and this is extremely compelling for people who are converting into Catholicism, finding out that early Christian beliefs were Catholic. A problem, though, is we do not just go by tradition and the Bible. Catholicism also has the church magisterium with councils, bishops, popes, cardinals to find infallible truth when it comes to faith and morals. I think that if you focus only on church fathers and don't also talk about the teaching magisterium, some Protestants will find a church father who disagreed with many of the others and be like, hey, look, this belief, therefore it's wrong, therefore Catholicism is wrong. And so I think it's really important to just establish that saints can be wrong about things. Some of the church fathers disagreed with each other. That's fine. We don't go by only tradition. We also have the church magisterium. And I made an entire video going in depth into the teaching magisterium, which will be linked in the video description. Number 8 is making claims like Catholicism doesn't change. I made an entire video on this, but I hear all the time converts and sometimes even cradle Catholics saying that the Catholic Church is the same as the early church and that the church doesn't change. So there is a truth in this statement that you can look at early Christian beliefs and biblical beliefs and you'll see that that is Catholic theology as well. But it's really important to make a distinction between dogma and discipline. Dogma are faith and morals that have not changed and never will change. Disciplines do change, and an example is having celibate priests. There have been times when priests are not celibate. We're currently in a time in the church where almost all priests are celibate, with the exception of Eastern Rite Catholics who can be married, and also if a Anglican or Episcopal priest converts into Catholicism and he has a wife and kids, sometimes he can become a Catholic priest. But with those exceptions, the vast majority of priests are currently unmarried, and that's something that could change. In 20 years, there could be a church council and they could decide we're not having celibate priests anymore, priests are going to be married. And that doesn't mean that the Catholic Church isn't based in early Christian theology. It's just something that can change. So go watch my video on that. I explain in depth the difference between dogma and discipline. Number 9 is getting offended. Don't get offended. Don't let stuff get to you. I see all the time in person and online where Catholics get so emotional when someone is saying something negative about the church, and like, I understand we're humans, we all have emotions, we're not simply intellectual, but I always think it's kind of weird to get emotional about it, because like, how are you going to survive in the world? There's so much hate towards Catholic beliefs, and so I think it's important to just have a thicker skin and to not take things personally. I've had people in my life say, I don't know how you do your job on social media because people are so mean towards Catholics. And I'm like, really? It doesn't affect me at all. The reason is because I'm like, I used to think that too. I hated Catholicism even more than that person. So for me, I'm like, okay, they could convert in a few years, right? Like right now they hate the church, but that passion could easily be flipped towards love for the church. So I think it's just important to not get overly emotional about things. One example, one of my friends in her RCIA was talking about how she doesn't understand why there's so much focus on Mary in Catholicism, and she was just expressing how she currently felt. There was someone in the RCIA who was already Catholic, but they were attending it, and this Catholic started crying. And I thought it was the wildest story ever, because you should expect in RCIA, people are going to come in and disagree with the church. That's why they're in RCIA, to change their thinking to fit with Catholic teaching and ask questions and debate. That's the whole point of RCIA. It's not like everyone comes in and is just like, yes, 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 yes. They're allowed to discuss and argue. That's part of RCIA. If things are really bothering you emotionally, just pray for the person who's making you upset. Number 10 is not admitting that you don't know something. It's completely normal to be having a conversation with someone and they ask you a question and you don't have a strong answer. You don't know the evidence you can share to explain the topic, and so it's really important to say, you know what? I don't have a strong answer for you right now, but is it okay if I text you an article tonight? You can send them a new Advent encyclopedia article. You can send them a podcast, a YouTube video. And honestly, it's probably gonna be more impactful for them to like read a whole article or watch a whole video on it than what you could have said in that conversation. And so it's really important to be humble and accept that we can't know everything and we can't know every apologetics discussion perfectly. And I think it's better to just admit that you don't know rather than trying to give an answer that is not a thorough answer to their question. That was this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!